for ladies football. So, a million for giving up a bit of time this evening, hopefully to give you something that might be out along the year. Um, Michael, I will try and increase sound. Give me 2 seconds. Okay, just going to check in. Can people hear now? Is that okay? I might ask somebody just to type in the chat to make sure you can hear it okay. Perfect. Thanks a million. The joy of headphones and everything else. So welcome this evening, everyone. We won't be keeping you too long. As promised, we'll try and get through these fairly rapidly for you. But as usual, if you have any questions throughout the evening, please feel free to type them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get back to them. But I suppose tonight what we're trying to do is just give you some tools. We can't come up with an ideal fixture plan for all of your counties. It's very much specific to your county. So it will be to see, I suppose, what matches your county is the main thing. So that's what we're going to look for. So we're going to kickstart off. And firstly, it would be very remiss of us to say a thank you to everyone involved in fixture planning in counties for the past 2 years. And I know I'd love to be sitting here saying we're out of COVID and it's gone. But the news hasn't helped us for the past couple of weeks. But hopefully we go into the new year, we might come into it. But it has been 2 very difficult years in terms of fixture planning and really unprecedented waters, not knowing what was going to happen from month to month or what was going to fit in. So a massive thank you to all yourselves, first of all, because the amount of games and activity you've organised for clubs and players has been phenomenal in such a short space of time. I think particularly last year, people forget the club activity didn't start till so late, and yet there was so much activity in it. So just to start, it would be remiss if we didn't say thank you to you all for the amount of work that went on in relation to fixtures over the past 2 years. So I'm just going to keep it a little bit interactive tonight. So very quickly, just in the chat there, if you want to type in 1 or 2 things that you think has worked well in relation to fixtures in your county, first of all. So just type in the chat there, 1 or 2 things that you think have worked well. And Jason, yeah, it's been recorded. So you'll be able to watch back or listen back, whichever's best for you. I'm just going to watch out for a few little comments there on some of the things that you think worked well. And I know there has been plenty from watching out at the fixtures over the past year or so. Getting minors played this year, excellent. Planning in conjunction with Camogie, very good, Michael. So getting the both teams in. Clubs going with 2 teams at underage especially. I know that's something we've noticed up at so many levels across, is the clubs going with 2 teams. And I know with COVID, a lot of clubs feared that they might lose players, and from feedback we're getting from a lot of clubs, they've actually gained people back who haven't played in a while as well. So, or maybe people who just wanted to get back out, seeing as they were locked in so much. So, yeah, they're good things there. Anything else coming in? Getting the fixtures played on schedule is obviously a big thing in relation to it. So quite a few things there in relation to what has worked well, and I have no doubt there's more. So keep putting them in if there is. But while we're waiting on those extra ones that comes in, maybe type in as well what have been the challenges in relation to fixtures in your county, because there always are challenges as well. So COVID has obviously been a number one. Getting finals played in Angani, giving the girls a day out. Yes, Jason, that was a real positive. Getting played in the centre of excellence there. Some of the challenges then maybe that counties have come across over the past, and take COVID out of it, just in getting fixtures in general, what are some of the challenges you come across? Adult v minors, yeah, so the overlap of players, access to pitches, and I know we're talking about split seasons and everything, and it's great in one way, but one big feedback that has come back to us is around pitches and referees, because everybody was looking for them at the same time, so it made it very difficult. Partnership with Camogie, so working closer to other sports, not having county girls allowed to play for their clubs. Now there is obviously last year there's very clearly a county window and a club window, so that was put in there for the club players. And remember, we're going to talk tonight, it's not always about having your county players playing every match for their club. They're there for the key competitions because they have other matches. So it's how we get the balance between the two, which we'll talk about. Congestion of matches, yeah, and especially as we talked about with everybody playing games at the same time. And that's where I suppose there's pros and cons of the split season. in relation to it, but congestion against. But it said last year or this year, I keep thinking we're into 2022 already, 2021, there was nothing got started till later in the year, so it made it that little bit more as well. So, and congestion with other sports as well. So quite a few, I suppose, really good stuff happening, but also some challenges that we've come across as well. I suppose some of the issues that we have been thrown at us as well in relation to it is, and some are from a club perspective and some are from the county board perspective, not enough games being provided for players. So sometimes we talk about players getting too much games, but then on the other coin, we have the players who get hardly any, too much or too little time between fixtures. So maybe we play a game now, but we don't play another one for a month's time, or all of a sudden, as we talked about, that congestion of having to play them bang, bang, bang after each other. 2 short time periods, maybe all the one age is played at one time and that's it, it's over. We don't play with that age again. Not being set until a short time scale before they were due to take place. And hopefully with the I suppose the greater plan of fixtures that's supposed to be going forward, that should make that a little bit easier. Too many fixtures not taking place and their scheduled date are fitting to fulfill. So the county board goes to this massive effort of having a proper fixture plan, and then it goes belly up because the fixtures don't get played or clubs don't fulfill fixtures. County board meetings been taken over by fixtures discussions, and we'll talk about that coming up. No competition guidelines in place. And if there's one thing I ask you to take from tonight, is that for the year coming forward, if you have nothing else in your county, you have clear competition guidelines for every single competition. Because with that, it takes away all of those discussions that you have at county board meetings, and you'll see that coming up. Dual player clash, and I said particularly when the seasons got squashed, all of a sudden now you were able to spread your fixtures over a year, but now you have the two codes actually playing at the exact same time. There is only so many weekends in the year, so how does it fit in? County managers dictating fixtures, and I said with the split, that was one of the reasons to try and prevent that now, is that it is very much, this is when you're playing with your county, and this is when the club kicks back in. Access to pitches, shortage of referees, which you've all mentioned, and cooperation with clubs. So these are just some of the things that the people have come back with in relation to this webinar. Getting cooperation with the clubs and getting them to work with. And poor weather, as you said there as well, as another one's come up. And unfortunately in Ireland, I think it's very hard to judge when we're going to get the good weather. We definitely are getting in November a dry one, but it's cold. But the poor weather definitely is something that can be detrimental to it as well. They're just some of the issues. So before we start, we stress, and anyone who's been on these fixtures webinars before, we do stress that when you're planning your fixtures, to remember the player rather than the team. Because it's grand saying, well, that club has played all their under 14 fixtures now, they're gone, that's fine, we'll leave them. So they'll get football at under 16. Only the players who are good, that are on the under 16 team, will get more football. So that's the only window that was under 14. Those players, that's the only football they get. So if you see the example that's there, maybe your under 14 team has 12 players who just play under 14. That's the only team to play on. But they also have 8 who are on the under 16 team. So yes, those 8 will get under 14 football and potentially under 16, but the 12 and under 14, they'll only get under 14. So we need to make sure there's under 14 fixtures, not just in a space of 6 to 8 weeks, that it's spread out, and we show examples of that. The same in under 16s. Maybe your under 16s have 6 players who are just under 16. And what you find sometimes, if they're not some of the best players, they mightn't even get starting on that under 16 team, which is worse. That's less games they're getting. You have the 8 that come up from the under 14s and 10 that maybe are also on the under 18s. And then you have the under 18s, 5 of which may be also on the adult, 10 on the 16s, so they're crossing over, and 7 that are just under 18s. I suppose what we're trying to stress is those ones that are the onlys, that's the only team they play for. So it's very important that we're tracking the players rather than the teams, because that might be the only football they get. And there was a big feedback of that came back, and particularly around the minors. And I know minor football has changed in a lot of counties over the past few years, where it's more spread out, where at different times of the year. But for years, it was always the last competition that was played, stuck in the depths of December. We'll play off a minor competition and get it over and done with. Yet that's the age group we keep saying that we're losing players at. So if that's their only team and we're throwing them in for the last few weeks of the year, of course we're going to keep losing them. So that's where we need to look and see, okay, where do we fit these things in? So we're just asking to remember, not every player plays in more than one team. Yes, some of them do, but in most cases, there's probably less. We talk about burnout. There's certain amount of cases of burnout, but there's actually probably more cases of the complete opposite of that, because they don't get any football. So it's getting the balance between the two. Your competition types, there's obviously loads, and it's up to your county what competition types you run. That can be leagues, cups, championships, 7, 9, 11 asides, go games, winter, spring leagues, participation leagues, non-county player competitions, festival of games. There's loads. I suppose what we want to stress is, if the new proposed structure does go through in relation to the so-called split season as such, that does not mean the club games don't start until the county ends. It just means maybe the county championship doesn't start, or maybe the league, but there can still be plenty of club activity, and should be plenty of club activity, adult, for all the other players in the club, whether that's a 7-a-side or 9-a-side, 11-a-side, or non-county player league, whatever it is. So it doesn't mean if this structure goes through, no club activity until halfway through the year. There should be loads of club activity still happening. So we need to stress that. It's just that the county players will not be available for that, or may not be available for that. It's to stop burnout of those as well. So just to stress that, it does not mean there's no club activity. There should still certainly be club activity to keep all the club players active. But when you are running these, as I keep stressing, track the players rather than the team. So is everybody getting football throughout this series? So what's the key ingredients of a fixture plan when you are putting them together? So there's 4 stages of a fixture plan. There's planning, which is, okay, looking at each competition, how many teams are in it, what's the structure going to be, how many rounds do we need, where will the competition be placed during the season, what days of the week will be used for the competition. So all the planning stuff, just writing that down on a piece of paper, getting the basics. And what you're always aiming to achieve is the minimum standards. I'm going to talk about them in a second for the various grades. And check service sport, or not service sport anymore, the fair and registration system, to see what suits your county. So maybe there's a real abundance of under 14 players coming up, but we don't have enough under 14 competition. So you can see by the numbers that's coming up from the clubs as well of what you're actually going to need. The next thing you're going to look at is the scheduling. So you know now how many rounds, many teams, what's the structure going to be. You now need to put it onto a calendar of scheduling it, and we're going to show you examples of that as well, of placing all the fixtures into the calendar, and these get published then prior to the beginning of the playing season. So where do they all slot? What competition goes after which? So it's actually putting all the planning stuff now into the calendar to see where it fits. Arranging then is deciding the specific matters of the fixtures, so the date of them, the time, the venue, the referee, so the nitty-gritty of actually getting that fixture played. And that's where it's so important of the competition guidelines, so that they get played as scheduled. If you don't have strong competition guidelines, you're going to have a nightmare, because teams can pull out, can change fixtures, etc., etc. So you'll see from the competition guidelines coming up, they're the thing that knits the whole thing together. And then the final piece, and it's a piece that's probably missed a lot of times, is actually reviewing it. So that's grand planning, scheduling, arranging, getting the fixtures played, but then actually reviewing what happened during the season. So gathering the stats on the games played during the season and comparing it with the national standards. And you'll see the standards coming up. For instance, where they played on schedule. Did players get the number of games they should have got? So actually reviewing it. And these recommendations then, if, okay, we realize that all the minor teams didn't get enough fixtures, but those recommendations should be brought forward then to the fixture planning for the next season. And in some counties, both GA and across ourselves as well, they actually keep a separate person, a fixtures reviewer, which can be done. They're not the person who's scheduling the fixture. They're actually just kind of watching all this and taking notes. So it helps by the end of the season going, well, I stood back and I realized this is what happened, or mid-season, midpoint going, we're now halfway through the season, we're not going to meet these standards. Maybe we need to pull this in, or there's clubs pulling out of X, Y, or Z. So that's possible to actually put a fixture reviewer there if that helps you as well as a county. So the fixtures review, the key part of it is to look at the minimum standards. So these are the minimum standards that were put in place by Central Council a number of years ago. So at adult, it was a minimum of 16 games played. So that's everything, that's leagues, championships, everything. That adults should be getting a minimum of 16 games. Under 15 to 18 was a minimum of 12 games. And under 14 and below, a minimum of 16 games. So that's kind of the recommended standards that were put in at the time. Now it's minimum, so counties can give a lot more than that. But if you're looking at a county and maybe your adults across all competitions, the maximum games they're getting is 8 or 9, really is that going to be value for money for them, for their membership? And that's what we're going to talk about later on. So it's getting the minimum standards to develop the players. So they should get more games than constantly just training sessions. The games then should be scheduled with gaps of no more than 21 days between them in the months of April to October. So that means that there's not, we play this week, we don't play for another month again. And it doesn't have to be the same competition. So that could be a non-county player league, and then it might be championship down the line. It doesn't matter what competition that is. An exception obviously can be made around exam time to accommodate the post-primary and third level students. And then games in the same grade should be scheduled at least 5 days apart. So there shouldn't be under 14 championships tonight. We're going to play again in 2 days, and we're going to play again in 2 days, and trying to nearly get it all done in the space of a month and get it out of the way. That's not going to help either. So given that rest and recovery time as well. But the target for counties should be to ensure that 80% of games are played as initially scheduled. So on the date they were fixed for, within a number of days, or either side of the original date. But trust me, if you have your competition guidelines, that will make that so much easier in relation to it. And Francis, you have a good question there that the standards still apply during split season. That'll all be looked at by Central Council to see what it is. But the still should, because again, club activity should still be happening. It shouldn't be not just starting at the end of split season. There should be loads of club activity. The only people that's not in it are your county players. So there still should be loads of club activity happening. So you still should have it. So hopefully that makes sense on that one. So when you are reviewing your fixtures, these are the things you should be asking yourself. So even now at the end of this year, I said COVID was a difficult year, so don't judge it on everything. But did we meet the minimum standards? And it may not have been possible, particularly with COVID being a difficult year. But having a look at it, looking back to the last few years, have you engaged with your clubs to review? And some of the biggest things, some of the biggest feedback you get from clubs, when clubs feel they've been part of it and actually then feed into next year, you do get greater buy-in from them. So have you engaged them, even a little survey to see what competitions went well, when do you think it should be ran, different things of trying to engage your clubs in your actual review. What worked well this year? And there's always things that worked well. We're very quick to jump on the things that didn't work well, but really give yourself credit on the stuff that worked well and write them down, because there's loads of stuff. What lessons then do we have? So it's not that stuff didn't work. We learn from them. What lessons do we bring to the coming year? So how do we try and bring lessons forward to meet those minimum standards? And have we looked at registration numbers then for various grades? Because maybe we only needed 3 divisions for this year's under 14s, but actually we have about 6 divisions of under 12s 2 years ago. So we're now going to have to look at that for under 14s. So just having a look at the registration numbers to make sure there's various grades for all. And there will be other questions that you'll ask yourself as well, but they're just the basic questions in relation to actually reviewing your fixtures for the year. Then when you have the review done, then you do the planning. So it is so important to do the review before you go into the planning, because you can't just plan the same thing over and over again without learning any lessons from the year before. So for the fixture planning, there's a number of steps. The first thing, assess the number of dates required to finish each competition, prioritizing your championship. So that's what we're saying in that planning phase. Just what's the number of rounds we're going to need? What's the number of dates, etc. The reason we're saying prioritizing championships is at least then you know you're going to put in the championship where you want it to be, and then you're going to filter your other competitions thereafter. So it's not that one's one over the other, but it means you get those prioritized into the time that you want. Then you look at your calendar, and remember, as I said, you can still use the first half of the year for the club activity, focus on the non-county players at adult level, and so important to keep those club players active in relation to it. Have a look at your calendar, see when these are going to fit in. You will, of course, need to add in provincial and national fixtures to see where they are, and hopefully whatever they're going to be, master fixture plan will be approved at the next Central Council meeting to allow all that to happen and give you time to plan your fixtures. And then prioritise the core age grades, so the 14s, the 16s, the 18s, the adults, and the first teams of those grades. So just getting those in first. And then, yes, in some counties, you might decide, you know what, we'd also like to have under 13s or 15s or 17s. But get your core age grades done first and then fit in everything else thereafter. So that's assess them, look at the dates, add in the fixtures you need to, prioritise the ones you're going to have to put in first. Then insert the most important competitions working back from the final date. So the final of the adult championship is going to be here. how many weeks back, semi-finals, quarterfinals, rounds, etc. Because then that dictates where maybe your league and your non-county player leagues and nine-a-sides, etc., where they start. So it's trying to insert all your competitions. The same with 14s, with 16s, with minors, the whole way through it, and inserting all your competition dates then to see where they filter into it. Insert all other competitions, ensure they're spread out to allow football for players of all ages through the season. I'm going to show you an example of this in a second. So it's to not have that block where, okay, we're going to play all our under 12s now for this month and that's it, because they'll get football at under 14. No, they won't. Some of them will, but some of them won't. Those under 12s need to be playing spread throughout the season, and the same with other age groups. Said, remember, not all under 12s play under 14, for example, so there must be enough games for all girls. And this is also where you can, I know it came up in your chat as well, liaising with the other sports where possible as well to see, okay, how do we fit into it? And you'll see in the competition guidelines coming up, a county that worked very much in line with each other, where they had the days even in of the different games to allow them to work across with Camogie as well. So there's some of the key steps in actually planning your competitions. Remembering as well that Go Games, there is rules there in relation to Go Games. Any counties that are seen not adhering to Go Games, they can also be penalised. You'll see from the rule book as well. It is so important. There is rules there that must be adhered to. So in the official guide, you'll see all the rules in relation to games in under 11 and younger being organised on the Go Games model. It has there what they are, and at under 12 level, competitions can be organised on a league format. So there can't be championships. It's on a league format on the basis that participating teams should be a maximum of 13 aside. So that is your Go Games rules. But in a lot of counties, they actually just cluster clubs, particularly with the smaller age groups, and let them, maybe I'm in one club this week, we're the host club next week, we go to someone else, and they can organise a lot of those themselves. And that's when you want your young referees. Unfortunately, when you go to maybe a small and under 10 blitz and you see referees who are refereeing 30 years there, and yet a load of young referees not getting the games. So this is where you get them appetite and get them started refereeing as well. So that's your Go Games that needs to be fitted in as well. So just to show you an example of what we mean. So this is just completely random dates, okay? So what we're saying here is they shouldn't be in blocks if at all possible. So in this case, it is very much in a block. So all the under 14s are being played and all the adult league is being played. There's no other age groups really. You can see under 16 starting to crop in. So that's fine. The under 14 team, they're getting games. The adults, they're getting games. But if that's all the games, and obviously there would have been some before or after it, anyone who's just on that under 14 team won't get any more football. Okay, the same with anyone who's just on under 16 or minor won't kick the ball in that whole month. So it's to try and spread it out a little bit more. As I said, the clubs can be organising Go Games blitzes if you want it in between. This is another example, and these are taken from counties who have done stuff. This isn't us just pulling stuff. There is counties who've spread things around a bit. If you look in this one, they tried to mix it up a bit so that each week there was under 14, there was 16, there was 18. And yes, you might say there's crossover of players from one to the other. So that might not work in every county. It might work maybe in a county that has bigger numbers across the board. But saying that, maybe you have under 14s on a Monday, under 16s on a Friday. Players are more than capable of doing that at that age. They just want games. But I suppose the difference, what we're trying to show you here is, if I'm a player who's just a player on that one team in any of these, I'm getting loads of football, okay? And I'm not waiting on another month to come. So we're all involved, engaged in different things. So it's to show that spread in relation to it. Another one here, you'll see spread out a little bit more, because maybe, as I said, it's a smaller county, maybe, and even some of the bigger counties mightn't have the numbers on the teams. But in this case, the under 14s are played during the week, under 16s, but then the under 18s is in the weeks in between, because we know a lot of our teams that the 16s and 18s, there's a big crossover in the number of players on those teams in particular. And you find that as the teams come up through, the crossover gets more and more as 16s and 18s, as numbers continue to drop out that little bit. But in this case, still, at least they're getting fairly frequent. Every fortnight they're getting a game, versus playing all under 16s in a block. When it's finished, we play all our minors in a block. And as I said, that's what you've seen a lot down the years, particularly with minors thrown in at the end of the year, just to get it played. Maybe 3 or 4 games we'll have a knockout, and then we're constantly giving out, how do we hold on to this age group? How do we hold on to them? Well, we're not going to hold on to them if we don't give them games. So it's to try and spread it out throughout the year, that they're constantly active, because that could be their only team. So that's what we're asking in these, is when you do look at your scheduling, that you're not scheduling in block. You're not saying, we play the under 14s in this month, that's it now for the year. Play under 16s in this, play under 18s in this, play adult in this. Because all you're doing then is you're tracking the team, you're not tracking the player. So that's where the scheduling is really important. The competition guidelines are what makes the scheduling work. So as I said, if you do nothing else, if you don't have competition guidelines, please put them in place for next year. And I mean, you've seen during the year, there was plenty of headlines, not just in ladies football, but in GAA as well, where a game finished level at extra time. Nobody knows what's supposed to happen. Okay, we didn't know whether we're supposed to go to kicks or didn't. That's because there was no clear competition guidelines. So the competition guidelines we set at the start of the year, and they then don't change. There can be separate ones for each age group. So the key thing with the guidelines, and there's sample of these on our website that you can literally download and alter then to filter for your county. This should be specific to your own county, because every county is different. They're in conjunction with the official guide in your county bylaws. You can have general guidelines and then specific for each competition, and you'll see examples of those. And they are in place to ensure fixtures take place as planned. That is literally what you're trying to do. And trust me, from working with one particular county where I couldn't say there were county board meetings, there were fixtures meetings. That's literally what was discussed at every county board meeting. But now, because the competition guidelines are there, the fixtures committee gets to deal with it. They don't come near county board meetings because there's clear guidelines there. The fixtures committee can deal with it, and that's where it stays. So samples of these, some of the areas, and I said these are only samples, some of the areas that could cover the fixtures themselves, referees, results, placings, match day, regulations. So what do we mean by those? So fixtures, things like changing the date of a fixture, what happens clearly in the guidelines, what happens if a club fails to fulfill a fixture or fails to fulfill multiple fixtures, if a club postpones matches, player eligibility, county teams, exceptional circumstances, pitch availability. So if you look at just one or two of these, and I'm not going to read all the content in it because you can download them and have all this to alter for your county. But for example, changing the date of a fixture, having the guideline written there, for this to be permitted, both clubs must agree on an alternative date before seeking permission to change a game from the fixture coordinator. No games can be moved or changed without permission from the coordinator. Failure to do this will result in the loss of points. So straight away, if that happens and they didn't get permission and they didn't agree it, loss of points. Doesn't need to come to a county board meeting. It's clearly in the guidelines. That's what happens. The onus is on both teams to inform the referee of the change. By agreement, fixtures may be brought forward to any extent, but must be agreed by the coordinator. If fixtures are put back, a 3-day rule applies. So there's, I'm sitting in a club. I realise I can't play on a date. Now I know the only way that can change is if I go to the other team and we agree to play it either before it or the 3-day rule, so 3 days from it, and we both then get agreement from the coordinator. If we don't do that, it stays on the original date and time. If we go outside of that, well then we lose the points. Very clear, stays with the fixtures committee, doesn't need an hour's discussion at a county board meeting. And this is where the competition guidelines are so important. Another one there, postponing matches. They can only be cancelled at short notice in the event of a bereavement of a close family member of a player, mentor, club official, serious tragedy in the parish, and provided the fixture committee and opposing team have been informed. And what's good in this as well, it clearly defines what a close family member is. Because I know that's something we get a lot of calls as well, going, my 6th cousin and we need a game cancelled. It clearly states what a close family member is. So there it's in black and white for the club to actually see as well. For referees could be another section. And by the way, all those headings that I showed you, there's samples of all of those in the competition guidelines on the website. So I'm just reading a few of them for you so you can see it. Referees, appointments. The fixtures committee shall appoint from under 13 to adult or whatever it is for your county. Contacting the referee has details of how to contact them or who needs to contact them, the behaviour and the conduct, and then the referee's expenses. So everything to do with refereeing is clearly in the competition guidelines. Everybody knows what happens, knows the responsibility before a ball is kicked at the start of the year. And if any clubs have any issues, it's at the start of the year when these have been ratified that they discuss them there and then. Otherwise, they're set in stone for the year. Results, what happens with the results? So it could be that they have to text back to the games management system, the referee. It could be that it's sent to the relevant coordinator. Whatever you have set as the way the results need to come back, you put them in these guidelines. If the referee is not appointed by the fixtures committee, what's the responsibility? So you may not have that case, but you build into the competition guidelines to suit your needs in the county. But where does the results come back from? Where is the onus from to get the results back to you as a county board? Decision on places as well, and this is definitely one that has to be done at the start of the year. It's not, geez, we're realizing now we're in the last round of the championship here, and there's a big chance that two teams are going to finish level on points next week if the results go a certain way. What are we going to do? That needed to be decided before the competition started. So hence the decision on placings is in it. So in the event of a tie, you can see there are different scenarios in the event of a tie. So the result of the game, number of points, you decide what's the different levels that you're going to put in if a game is tied. So just to make sure that it's very clear before the competition starts, this is what happens. Does it go to a playoff, etc., etc. So it's very clear. We go into the last game. We know the competition guidelines. We know what we have to do to get through because it's very clearly there in black and white. The timings and days of games can be another section. So these are all sections that can be in your competition guidelines. This is one, as I said, a county who was working really closely with Camogie. They actually sat down and they worked out the days and the times of the games. So it meant there was alternating weeks, or in counties that was very busy, it was 11 a.m. on a Sunday, and maybe that age group was on a Saturday for Camogie, etc., or alternating weeks, whatever works in your county. But even if you're not working with other sports, it's great that you have set that date and time. So going back to that one of, if a club wants to change a fixture, well, at least if they know all our games, and particularly for girls with part-time jobs and everything else, all our games are normally on a Sunday at 11:30. So they know when it is. And I know when I was coaching in Dublin, that was handy. We knew all the games was Wednesday night. But you know when it is, and then at least you can work your ways around it. So that's where it's important to have a look at the time and days of games, but a great way of working with other sports if needed as well, to actually see where these are. Now, obviously, there may be subject to change, depending on getting pitches and everything else. But it sets a good thing, and it's easier for a club to get a pitch because they can book well in advance if the games are at the same time every week or every month or whatever your schedule is. On match day then, what's the numbers that's allowed? So the numbers that's allowed, you may have some competitions that are 9 aside or that are 7 aside. You can put in whatever the numbers are. And then on the sideline, who's permitted on the sideline? I know obviously with COVID, there was COVID restrictions there as well, but in general terms, in relation to water carriers, etc. But with COVID restrictions, they'll always take precedent in this. But just so you can see who can actually be on the sideline. Because you do find with a lot of clubs, if you don't have this and all of a sudden they get to a final and you tell them, oh, by the way, your manager, your mayor Fornia, and your 4 water cards, that's all that's getting in here. And nearly there's uproar because they've had 40 on the sideline for every other game. So at least if they know this is what it is from the start of the year, well, then it'll make it easier on them. Competition regulations then at each grade. So you can have different ones at each age grade, and then you can have for each competition. So for instance, this could be the adult, it could be the number of players in each competition. So from championship, league, etc., depending on which competition it is. The subs, what happens if there's a walkover? So again, doesn't need to come near the county board meeting. It is very clearly there in the competition guidelines for fixtures to deal with it. Cup competition, what's the rules? Which could be a non-county player league, for example. Championship rules, league rules. So if I'm the manager of the adult team in the club, in one page there, I have everything that I need to know in relation to our championship or competitions for the year, what there is, what's in or out, and I have the previous competition guidelines as well. But this is where if it's all agreed at the start of the year, well then there's no arguments. You can see there even in the championship rules, maybe you have the 5 kicks. Going back to that thing of the headlines that was made during the summer, of not knowing what happened when it was a draw at the end of the game, well then they will know because all this had been agreed at the start of the year. So for each competition, each age grade that this is done, and it's all then in one competition guideline booklet that the club has a copy of everything. So they're just some of the guidelines. I said I'm not going into each of them because there is a whole book there, sample book for you on the website that you can take, go through it, work it out for each of your grades, each of your competitions. But you can see if you have them in place, your competitions are more likely to reach that schedule, reach the minimum standards, because the clubs will fall into it. And if you haven't already got them, yes, year one can be hard, but the clubs will fall into them fairly quickly in year two. Planning your county should ensure there's enough games being provided for players at all grades. As I said, there's not too much or too little time between fixtures, not too short a time period for fixtures, so that they're not on those blocks, as we mentioned earlier. So if I'm an under 14 player, I should still be getting football over a number of months throughout the year, not just in a block. Fixtures set in advance and plans for the clubs at the start of the year. And then fixtures take place in their scheduled date and competition rules in place. So that the competition rules, as said, is the glue that brings all this together. So if the game's set for Sunday, the 11th of August at 2 p.m., unless agreed by both teams to play before that date, it can't be played unless exceptional circumstances. We clearly know we cannot change it unless X, Y, or Z is in the competition guidelines. So it helps your scheduling. And it's so unfair on county boards. They put so much time and effort into doing the schedules, and it could all be blown up by clubs not playing on date. So this way, the club has to fall into line rather than the county board constantly having to reschedule stuff. The results of having all of this in place, you'll have clear competition guidelines and a fixture plan, which is the number one thing. Everyone will clearly know at the start of the year, what do the fixtures look like and what's the glue that pulls it all together. You'll have a smooth run in the fixtures. The fixtures committee can fulfill their role. So it's not just about setting fixtures. They now have something that if a club can't play on a certain day, instead of them going between 140 dates between two clubs, the two clubs know they have to agree it themselves and come back. If they can't agree, it's still staying at 2 o'clock on Sunday, because that's what it says in the guidelines. The county board meetings are not consumed by fixtures. County board meetings should not be fixtures meetings. There is a fixtures committee there to fulfill that role. County board meetings should be all the other business of the county board. Yes, there might be an odd time that a specific thing has to be dropped in, but the certainly shouldn't be sitting there going, Club A, can you tell me if that under 12 game was played? Club B, that's not your job. That's the fixtures committee's role, and let them do it. And overall, with all this glue, the key thing is you'll get more games played. By having all of this in place, more and more games will be played because everybody knows when and how they have to play them. Remember, national provincial fixtures, I suppose, just pulling all that information together, maybe in the first part of the season, but does not mean no club activity. So again, I'm stressing that it does not mean no club activity. You should be planning club activity for the year, still as normal, but certain competitions maybe are after when the county players are back to the clubs. Plan in advance to increase access to pitches. So if you can have it that we know it's every Wednesday at 8 o'clock, well, at least if I know my home fixtures at this date, I can try and get our pitches then for those dates instead of not knowing till maybe a week in advance or 5 days in advance and then trying to look for a pitch. So the more we can plan in advance, the better. Look at the number of games that you will have now because you need to assess the requirements of the referees. And I do know because of the condensed calendar, I mean, a lot of referees referee across codes and they were out, I don't know how many times a day, never mind a week. But if you need more, so if you know now when you're looking or start of the year, you're looking at it and you're going, listen, we have weeks where we have X amount of fixtures and we only have this amount of referees. Well, act then. Don't wait till then and try and go and look for people. Get your referee courses set up. Get your Go Games courses to allow all those young referees to go and do all your Go Games. Get your adult course to get some more referees up and make sure all your referees have gone through the annual refresher course. So doing all that at the start of the year so that you have the referees when it comes to actually the games happening instead of trying to look for them then. Unfortunately, none of us have a crystal ball. I'd love to say we did. Now, maybe for the restrictions next year, fingers crossed, I certainly don't want to see them, and I'm sure anyone on this call doesn't want to see them, but a plan B may be needed. So we always have to think, do you know what? If we have to change things, we have to change them. And as I said, that's why we're giving credit to everyone at the start of this webinar, because there was so many things had to be changed and you done it. And there was so many games played and it was a pleasure to see. So if the plan B is needed, I have no doubt you'll have your plan B. And then that thing of don't leave any age group until the end, because it could be their only team. So you don't want a player saying, I didn't kick a ball till October. Okay, and you can say, well, your club had loads of games, but they're not on that team. If they're not on that team, they didn't kick a ball till October. So to try and make sure that we have that spread of age groups across the year so that they're all getting football. And just take home messages before we wrap up for yourselves. All executives should be aware of the importance of reviewing all fixtures to put a plan in place for the coming year. So as I said, that review piece is something sometimes we miss. So do that review, even together as an executive, asking a few clubs, etc. Get the review done before putting the plan in place for the coming year. You can have that separate reviewer if you want, separate to the fixtures secretary committee. They're not going to be telling them they're doing anything wrong. It's literally somebody who has a bit of time to step back and say, yeah, do you know what, we're going to hit the standards in this, we're going to hit the standards in this, this is great, here's a little lesson learned. Because if you're consumed in actually having to roll out in the operational piece, you mightn't remember that at the end of the year, some lessons that were learned throughout the year. So that reviewer is possible. Communication then between all parties is essential if the reviewer is in place, because they're certainly not working against any committee. If the fixtures committee are reviewing the fixtures, so if you're also the reviewers and you're also setting the fixtures, it's important to have an open mind to change if required. So maybe you've done something, didn't work. It's like, instead of saying, well, we're going to keep going again, okay, what do we need to change to make it work? Because it was something that we know we had passionate about it. A few little changes will make it work the next time. The goal in all counties is to achieve the minimum standards in your county when you're establishing your fixture plan. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make sure there's minimum standards for every player that actually registers in the county, that they get enough games. It's essential to liaise with clubs as it will encourage cooperation and it will decrease the games cancelled. That and the competition guidelines will decrease the amount of games cancelled 100%. But the key message, I suppose, when we're putting fixtures out, and again, it's come back to the minimum standards, is value for money with the number of games. So sometimes people say, oh, it costs this to play ladies football, or it costs this to play basketball, or it costs this. But actually, if you turn it on its head, what's the value we're getting for whatever we're paying? And to me, in ladies football, across the boards, because of the amount of work that you're doing, the amount of value for money people are getting is exceptional. And I know from having nieces and nephews at home that paying hundreds of euro to be involved in other things and not getting near the amount of activity versus what they're playing to be part of their local Gaelic Games club, and the amount of games and trainings and everything they're getting is serious value for money. So that's what we're trying to say is, yeah, because this is the amount of games we've offered you in the county, you're getting serious value for money. Don't get hung up on the cost of the price. You're getting the value because this is the amount of games that are being provided with you at all of these age groups. And that goes back to those minors maybe who years ago didn't get a game till November. Where are they getting value for money? You'd question it. 2 or 3 games at the end of the year, I don't think it's value for money. So we just need to have a look at that in relation to it. So have a look, as I said, track the player rather than the team, and that will help you see in relation to the value for money. So I know there's a lot of stuff thrown at you there very quickly, but the reason being, of course, is that a lot of this stuff is on the website, particularly the competition guidelines, and we go through that one by one and it'll muzzle you up for the night versus giving you a bit of time to actually read through it. So hopefully some of what coming in there tonight will actually help you. But I stress again, get your review done, look at your plans then, but make sure you have the competition guidelines, or it doesn't matter what plan you have. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to fire them in. I see a few has come in there. Possible to do a referee course with less than 12 would be a big step. 6 to 8 referees can be a huge addition to the county, but without 12, the course can't take place. But it's also, I suppose, PJ, remembering that it's no point in us sending a tutor down there for 6 people, because if we have 6, 4 turns up. That's the reality of it. But the good thing has been, particularly with the annual refresher, since we moved them online, any county who didn't have enough for an annual refresher, there's no excuse for those referees, because they're going to attend the annual refresher online. So there's no issue now in relation to actually getting enough people on the course. The other thing is, if you want to run for new referees and you don't have enough, make contact with us, because I can guarantee you there's another county that doesn't have enough as well. And we're able to team you up, particularly with so many courses available online now. It makes it much easier to team that up as well. So if you are having issues in a county where you haven't enough maybe to run a course, touch base with us and we'll team up with another county. I said, particularly with the online option, it makes it much easier. The minimum standard includes semi-finals and finals of competitions. Not every player will make the semi-finals and finals of the competitions, so therefore it wouldn't be in their minimum numbers. But to me, if all you're going is too short, you're not doing so bad, in fairness, because most of the players, or those players in those teams, will reach the semi-finals and finals. And don't get hung up on it. Maybe you're too short of it this year. Next year's plans, we've learned we're now one short of it. The year after, it's just about getting enough games rather than a player saying, listen, I had a player on to me today from a certain county who is just going to give up. And the reason being she played 3 games this year. And I don't have an answer to give her because I can't blame her. She's not getting the value for money, if that makes sense. Any other questions there? Feel free to fire them in. Give a minute. As I said, I know there's quite a bit was thrown there at the same time. The link to the competition guidelines on the website, what I'll actually do, I'll make it even easier again. I'll have everyone's email address that registered on here tonight, and I'll fire you the actual document so that you're able to alter it in a Word document. That might be easier for everyone. Then you can alter it in a Word document, no problem. It'll just make it easier for you. So I think that's all the questions. Thanks a million to everyone for joining. Feel free, as I said, at any stage to touch base, ask any questions. I'd love to say, here's the magic ball, here's your fixtures calendar. It's not that simple. And we'll always be tweaking and changing. And I know next year is going to be a learning year for us all, I think, again. But I am hoping there was a little bit of help there for you all. Number one thing, stay safe. We will see you hopefully back on the pitches in the new year if all our numbers decide to go off. And we will see you soon. But thanks, everyone. And we have a quick question before I wrap up here. I'll hold off for you there, Francis. But for anyone else who wants to go, feel free to pop off. And I'm not going to say until December the Happy Christmases, so we'll hold off on that for the next few webinars that's coming up. But thanks everyone for joining in tonight. And if anyone has any questions, I'll hang on here for a minute anyway. The National League been put back in late January, early February, so that you'll see the proposed fixture schedule has been sent to all county secretaries. If you contact your county secretary, you'll be able to see it. 2023 we won't even be looking at yet. All we're looking at is 2022. So 2022 is all that's been looked at the minute. Okay, good night everyone.